I'm going to structure the talk, or the idea was to structure it around the kind of the 3 or 4 areas that we are all familiar with. That pyramid of technology, people, process, and of course, a little bit about budget. We'll start off with the familiar and technology, and a lot of you are, I'm sure, familiar with this DIKW model, which is this idea of the progression, I suppose, from data to information, from information to knowledge, and knowledge to wisdom, in terms of how we actually assimilate that as individuals and, I suppose, as organizations. To explain the model, data would tell us that this is a round and red object. Information would probably tell us that it's a tomato. Can't pronounce the Latin name, by the way. Knowledge would tell us that tomato is a fruit, and wisdom might tell us not to put it in a fruit salad. So I'm not sure whether that's an explanation, but that's the theory behind it. I think our focus very much in GIS, or in the GIS community, is too much focused here. It's all on data and a little bit of information. We get chastised in the EPA for being the part of the organization who deal with dots on maps. I think everybody's the same. So we provide lots of dots and even lots of attributes associated with that dots. But is that really useful? Is that information that the business wants? I'm not sure. In terms of GIS, we can map points, measure lines, tell how far things are apart, look at land cover, all those other wonderful things. But so what? Things I need to know as a business user is, how do I improve water quality? What measures are going to be effective? How much is it going to cost? Who should do it? And how do we track the progress? And I'm afraid when I sit down in front of our GIS viewer, it doesn't have the answer, unfortunately. In fairness, GIS can provide a lot of the solution, but I think, as Garode said, not in isolation. We have a long way to go before we have systems that can answer the types of questions that we really want to answer. So I think the key is that we've got to look more at integration. And really, we need to focus on the infamous golden tomato, and that's much more around knowledge and wisdom. And that can only be done by really integrating GIS with other IT systems and beginning to focus on those questions that people want answered. If we look at Google Maps, I mean, we have to acknowledge that it does what it does very well. It can tell us how to get from A to B, it can tell us where there's a hotel that we might want to stay in, and it can show us a picture of the street. Do I need to say more? It's fairly much focused. And if you're a country bumpkin like me, you've probably looked up where the hell is the Clyde's Thingy-me-bob Hotel, because I had to find it, particularly if it wasn't called the Berkeley Court. So, you know, we have to kind of go back and look at some of these examples and say, is what we're doing in our organizations hitting the same spot? I'm not sure that it is. So what can we do about technology as a collective? Well, I think we can share our experience in forums like we're at today. We can share technical know-how. We can share code, because we're, a lot of us, developing on the same systems. And we can look at collaborative development, some of us coming together to develop systems that are of use to all of us. And maybe we should think more about building a GIS developer community. It's pretty non-existent in Ireland from what I can see. On the process side, well, what have we got to say about that? No doubt about it, you're at nothing developing any IT system, GIS or otherwise, unless you understand the business process. Question I have, starting off on a lot of the work that we do, is, do the business understand the business process? And sometimes they don't. So you have to challenge it, you have to begin to understand it yourself, and we have to be able to add value to it. We can't be GIS snobs. We can't just say, well, GIS does this, you know, it has this, it has that, it has attributes and all the rest. It's just another service. The business user isn't worried about all the fancy fandangly things that GIS has. All they want is to provide the information that they want. It can do a lot of very powerful stuff, but if people don't want that stuff, then it's a waste of time and it's a waste of money. And as I said, we need to understand the business processes out there from our business users. because they don't understand GIS. They don't know what GIS can do. So there's no point in us sitting down waiting for the user requirements to include spatial intersections, which I don't understand GIS either, by the way, but they're not going to spell it out for you. We're going to have to get in there and actually give them some suggestions on how things can be made better. This is the end game at the end of the day. This is what we're all trying to achieve, I think particularly with the employment control framework. And I mean, isn't this all what we want, really? Push of a button, what's the answer? 42, apparently, the meaning of life. I was thinking the other day, not the other day, this morning actually, about GIS and an analogy, and they don't come to your mind all that easily. But I think I have had, I suppose, the experience, and I think Micheál O'Connell down there will also remember, where you're driving to Dublin, your car decides suddenly to not want to go anymore, and with these things with computers in them now, they just more or less flash that little message at you. I won't say what the expletive said, but it may as well just say that. So you ring a mechanic and they come out. At that point in time, you don't want the guy to take his laptop out and show you line diagrams of the electronics of your car and where the poles are, and it's at pole 42. You want to know how much it's going to cost to fix it and how long it's going to take. And I suppose that's where the parallels end, because you're not going to get those answers from a mechanic by the side of the road either. So. But effectively, it's really, we have to focus on providing information that the business user want. But a note of caution about business users: they tend to want it all, I suppose. And this is really where we have to kind of do a little bit of thinking ourselves, and the business comes back to the business process. When I was young, and money was real money, and you were sent into to get a message in the shop, and you might have had 5p change, you'd stand there and you'd look at this array of sweets. You got about 5 seconds from our shopkeeper, and if you didn't pick something, she picked it for you, took the money, and there you go. And you were happy enough with what you got, to be honest with you. So I think users can be a lot like that. We just have to give them what we think it is that they need, because otherwise, God knows what you end up with. We all have these in our closet. The Edsel was a famous Ford car that was, at the pinnacle, technology cutting. It had lots of stuff in it that really set the standards for lots of cars. But it was a complete flop, and the Edsel look wasn't here to stay in 1959, because Ford withdrew the Edsel in 1960. It was such a flop. But we have lots of these. We have lots of kind of overly complex solutions that nobody really uses. I just picked a few off the internet. Generally the answer is in there if anybody can find it. Sometimes I would say we build solutions for ourselves a bit too much. We think that everybody can, GIS is just the most intuitive thing in the world. It's not. I'm going to try and give this example a little bit about how we found out some of this. We have a system called DREAM, Dynamic Risk Enforcement Application Methodology. It's a risk assessment methodology for looking at urban wastewater treatment plants. It took us about a year. We had one person working with the business on this for about a year, coming up with the actual methodology we use. And this is a very simple representation of that, where it looked at, the distance of things downstream, the distance of things upstream, and so on. And then that was combined with other kind of information from other systems about level of compliance and about whether the last inspection was compliant or non-compliant, and monitoring data and so on. The tool performs about 35 decisions when you run it, and originally we wrote that output to a database, and the user interface was a spreadsheet which had 80 columns and 531 rows. It was completely unintelligible. At the time, we had a new developer start, and we kind of just spent a very short period of time, because we hadn't allocated much budget to this, to look at what we would do to make that better. The thing is that you can view it on a map, or you can view it using this Power Pivot application, which we built. Power Pivot just presents the information in a graphical form, and the users can kind of play around with the data. Here we're looking at the fact that they can sort everything by an overall risk score. The methodology gives everything an overall risk score, and that's how it's ranked. We can look at the level of treatment of the plant, whether it's secondary or primary. We can look at whether they're compliant or non-compliant. We can look at observed impacts, whether it's impacting on the downstream water, and all sorts of other things about Margaret-Tifera, what the receiving water is, river, transitional and coastal, all the rest of these things, what local office that it's in and what river basin district it's in. The idea, what this was built for, was to allow the inspectors to go in and really query this information and be able to kind of organize campaigns and to really focus in on the plants that were of interest to them. The point I want to make about this, and we'll see it in a second, so it brings you down to a plant, you click on it, and it brings you back, I suppose, all the information about that plant that was derived from the risk assessment methodology. And you can show it on a map. B. The point I want to make about this is the inspectors use the Power Pivot tool and rarely look at the map. The map is very much secondary. They're not going in and looking at the dots and thinking this is great. They like this idea of the fact that, you know, they get structured information that they can sort and they can filter through. We spent, as I said, a year doing the kind of the model that was all done in GIS and all processed, but nobody really sees DREAM as a GIS application. The idea is keep it simple. Form and function. Most of the things that are kind of iconic designs have been well thought through before they're actually put onto the market. So what can we do as a community? Well, my view is aim for golden tomato. Push it up the value chain. Think about the actual questions that people have and answer the questions. Don't get obsessed about showing 42 different layers of information on a map. It's really just, you know, not what's needed. Understand the questions the business needs. Remember that GIS is a service like any other IT service, and it's only going to be part of the overall application answer. And understand how these services integrate with other IT systems, as I said. We need to begin to think a little bit at an organizational level about the services that we offer and understand that we're not the beginning and end of the universe. We interact with other stakeholders, we interact with clients. How do our IT systems, how do our GIS systems interact with other organizations? Think beyond the boundaries of just your own organization. I think Inspire is an opportunity for us in this regard. It does set some standards that we can all work from and really begin to link our respective services together. And look at what the opportunities are for shared services. And I might come back to shared services in a minute. People and resources I'll deal with together. I kind of showed this picture at the beginning, you'll remember as the introduction to my talk. And it's a wonderful picture if it was like that, but I mean it's not. It's a little bit more like this. And we're always trying to get that sweet spot in the middle, but nothing's staying the same. I mean, everything moves around. Technology changes every 6 months at this stage. Processes change a bit slower, and people, well, some change and some don't. Budgets are certainly changing at the minute, and that's one thing we can be sure of. They're going in one direction. When we talk about resources, well, I'm sure we all think we just don't have enough. Not enough people, we're all there. There's more work than things to be done. But I suppose how many government bodies are working in the area of GIS and GIS development? I think there's quite a lot of us. So what's the combined government spend on GIS? Has anybody any idea? I don't, but I think 10 million. It's probably a conservative estimate. I'd say if I said to anybody here, here's 10 million, go off and develop some GIS services, I can see Garrod begin to salivate over there. You know, that's quite an amount of money. And the question I have is, are we getting value for money? I suppose, what is it that you're doing out there in GIS that we're not doing? And what is it that we're doing that you're not doing? I don't know. I think we're all doing, by and large, the same things. We're all building viewers, we're all building services. We're all building them independently, doing the same thing over and over again. It's all about people. Let's not forget that, whichever way we go. They are a limited resource and the most important resource that we have. We're asking them to work harder, longer, faster, be more productive, all of these things. I think we all feel a bit like this, down in the trenches, and it's getting deeper and it's getting worse. But to be honest with you, it's the big picture stuff that are going to kind of get some progress for us. You don't see what we're at. We're also busy doing the day-to-day stuff. We don't see where we're going. You have to take time and step back and look at what it is we're trying to achieve. We've got to know where we're going and how we're going to get there. Recognize that it's not going to be given to us on a plate. We're going to have to work for it. Sometimes it's hard to stand out from the crowd. If everybody's going in one direction, it's very hard to say, look, I think that's a bad idea, or let's do this the other way. It takes a bit of courage. It takes a bit of leadership. And now is the time, I think, for leadership amongst our GIS community, and let's not even say our GIS community, but our IT community. We're in a bit of a crisis. What we're doing is part of the solution to get us out of this, to make us all more efficient, and to put us back on the right road. So what can we do? Work together to deliver more GIS services, more efficient GIS services. Collaborate on projects that are relevant to us and focus on shared services. I'll have to say that, from my experience of going around and having meetings, I'm kind of sick of talking about shared services. We've all been talking about shared services and collaboration, but I see very little action. I hear a lot of talk, but very little action. It's time for us to kind of get the finger out and get some action going in this area. And I suppose my last point really is get out of the trenches and see the bigger picture, because it doesn't matter how many people we have, we're not going to make progress unless we have some vision for where it is we need to go. Thank you very much.